Montana Territory, July 1879, the tracks were the only thing she had left to follow. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt. Her boots sank with each step into the rutted earth where wagon wheels had cut deep. The sun hung low, bleeding orange across the endless plains as if the sky itself mourned behind her. Naomi Prescott kept her eyes forward, jaw set, even as the wind pulled at her bonnet and the ache in her legs screamed louder than her thoughts. She had followed the wagon tracks since dawn. She would follow them until sundown. She had nothing else. 3 days ago, the wagon train left her, not on accident. They said she slowed them down, that her 2-year-old son, Oliver, cried too much. That she was bad luck since her husband died back in Kansas, and she had not stopped looking like the grief still lived in her bones. They left her and Oliver behind with only a half-empty canteen, a sack of flour, and a prayer she never asked for. Now she carried Oliver against her chest in a sling made from an old shawl. He was asleep, his cheeks flushed with heat. She tried not to think about what might happen if she could not find water or shelter before night, her vision blurred. The wagon tracks veered toward the horizon, and just when she thought she might collapse beside them, a dark shape on horseback appeared in the distance, heading straight for her. She froze, her hand tightening around the small knife she had tucked into her boot. The rider came closer, the setting sun casting him in silhouette tall in the saddle, wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a rifle strapped across his back, and a dark brown gelding beneath him that moved like it knew the land. He slowed as he approached, his horse snorting softly. Naomi took a step back, trembling but standing her ground. The man dismounted, his boots hitting the dirt. "You lost?" he asked, voice low, steady. Naomi lifted her chin. "No," he glanced at the sling. "That your boy?" "Yes." He looked at her a moment longer, then offered a calm nod. "Name's Fletcher Ford. You look like you need water," she hesitated. "I do. I got a camp not far from here. Shade, water, food. You can rest there, then decide what comes next. I do not trust men who make decisions for me." "I do not blame you," he said easily. "But I am not here to make any for you." Fletcher turned and walked back to his horse, waiting to see if she would follow. Naomi stood still, heart pounding. Oliver stirred in his sleep, his lips dry against her collarbone. She followed. They reached his camp before dark, tucked beneath a bluff near a thin stream that shimmered in the fading light. Fletcher had a canvas tent, a small fire pit, a saddlebag stuffed with supplies. He poured her water without a word and handed it to her. She drank it slow, letting the coolness spread through her chest like hope. "Where were you headed?" he asked finally. "Fort Benton. My late husband's cousin had land near there, said he might take us in. You trust him?" "I do not have enough left to doubt him," he nodded. "I am headed that way myself. I can take you." Naomi's fingers tightened around the tin cup. "Why?" Fletcher crouched near the fire, striking flint with practiced ease. "Because leaving a woman and child in the dirt is the kind of thing I do not stand for. And because I lost someone once, and I still remember what it felt like to need someone who did not leave." They sat in silence for a while as the fire caught, and the night stretched out around them. Naomi fed Oliver a bit of hardtack soaked in water, and he drifted back to sleep bundled in blankets Fletcher offered without asking. "You travel alone?" she asked softly. "I do, been that way a long time." "Why?" He looked at the flames. "Because I thought it was safer than losing someone again." Naomi watched him. He had lines around his eyes that spoke of sun and sorrow, but nothing about him felt sharp or dangerous. His voice had kindness in it. He moved like someone who had spent years learning how not to hurt anything. "I can leave in the morning if you prefer." "I never said that," she said. Fletcher looked over, eyebrows raised slightly. "I am not used to kindness without price," she added. "I am not offering a price." She nodded once. "Then I will stay." He gave her space to sleep his own bedroll, the warmer side of the fire. He took the ground beside the horse, wrapped in his coat. Naomi lay awake long after Oliver had drifted off again, listening to the wind shift through the grass and the quiet weight of her own heartbeat slowing. There was something about Fletcher that made her feel like the world might not be done with her yet. By morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Fletcher whistling low as he saddled his horse. "Trail is clear west," he said when she sat up. "We can ride slow. I will take shifts walking so the boy stays comfortable." "You thought about all that already?" "I think about the things that matter." Naomi studied him. "And we matter, you do now." Her throat tightened. She looked down at Oliver, then back at Fletcher. "All right. We ride west." He helped her up behind the saddle, careful with her legs, steady with his hands. When they rode out, the sun was still low, the wagon tracks fading behind them. Naomi did not look back. She did not need to anymore. The wind shifted on the second day, carrying the scent of pine and wet stone. The land had begun to rise, slow and steady, until the open plains behind them gave way to a country of folded hills and scattered juniper. Fletcher kept the horse at a careful pace, letting the weight of 3 bodies find rhythm on the trail. Naomi rode behind him, one hand braced on the saddle horn, the other cradling Oliver's back as he dozed with his head against her shoulder. "He always sleep this much?" Fletcher asked without turning. "Not when he's well. He's been too quiet." "He feel warm." Naomi laid her cheek against the top of her son's head. "A little. His lips are dry, but he nurses when he can. There's a spring not far ahead. Cold water runs all year. We'll stop there, let him cool off." She said nothing in reply, but her grip on the saddle eased. The sun reached its highest point when they reached the spring. It bubbled out from a shaded seam in the rock, feeding into a narrow pool lined with willows and stone. Fletcher dismounted, tied the gelding to a branch, and helped Naomi down without speaking. She moved stiffly, knees buckling slightly when her feet met the ground. Fletcher caught her elbow, steadying her. "Let me hold him while you wash." She hesitated. Her arms had gone numb hours ago, but the thought of handing Oliver over made her stomach clench. Still, the boy needed care, and Fletcher had never once reached for anything that wasn't offered. She passed the child to him gently. Fletcher tucked Oliver against his chest, supporting the child's head with a broad palm. Naomi knelt at the water's edge, cupping handfuls to her face, then soaking a cloth from her satchel to press against her son's cheeks and neck. Fletcher watched quietly, kneeling beside her. "He's flushed, but breathing steady. He needs rest out of the sun, and food that isn't stale. There's cornmeal in my pack. I'll boil it soft, add a little salt. It'll sit easy on his belly." Naomi sat back on her heels, water dripping from her chin. "You always this prepared." "I don't take chances with life, not anymore." She looked at him then, eyes narrowing slightly. "You said you lost someone." "I did." He didn't offer more, and she didn't press. She only nodded once and reached for her son. Fletcher passed him back with care. They made camp near the spring, this time with a patch of shade and the sound of trickling water easing the silence between them. Fletcher built a small cookfire and stirred the cornmeal slowly, his sleeves rolled up, forearm scarred where a burn had once healed rough. Naomi sat nearby, her back against a warm rock. Oliver curled beside her on the blanket. She watched Fletcher's hands move steady, practiced, never rushed. "You cook like you've fed more than yourself before." "I worked a line shack one winter, kept 4 drovers alive through blizzards and bad meat, learned quick that hungry men get mean." She traced a finger along Oliver's arm. "You live that way now, moving between places." "No home." "Had a place once, in Wyoming. Someone burned it down after my brother was accused of horse theft. He didn't do it, but they didn't wait to find out." Naomi's gaze lifted. "And you left." "I buried what was left and didn't look back." The quiet stretched again, but not awkwardly. The kind that settled like a blanket, worn and warm. Fletcher stirred the pot one last time, then filled a tin cup and brought it over. "Let it cool a little." Naomi accepted it. "Thank you." "You don't owe thanks. You owe yourself a chance to start over." "That's all." She looked at him closely, studying the lines at the corners of his mouth, the way his eyes always scanned the trees before he sat fully still. "You don't talk like most men I've met." "I listen more than most." She dipped a spoon into the mush and tasted it. Mild but warm. Oliver woke enough to take a few bites, his little hands reaching for the spoon. Naomi helped him eat slowly, then rocked him until he fell asleep again. Fletcher moved a little closer, sitting cross-legged in the grass. "You said your husband had a cousin in Fort Benton. You still plan to go?" "I don't know, I've never met him. He wrote once after Henry passed, said I could come if I needed, but his handwriting was crooked even then. He might not be alive. I've got a friend near Judith crossing traps along the river. He keeps a ledger of who trades with him. If your cousin's been through, he'd know. You'd take us there." "I'd take you as far as you need." Naomi nodded slowly. "You keep offering things without asking for anything back." Fletcher looked out toward the hills. "Some debts don't need paying." She studied him in the fading light, unsure if the ache in her chest was grief softening or something new beginning to stir. She didn't speak it aloud. Instead, she reached for her threadbare shawl and spread it beside her on the blanket. "There's room here," she said. "If you'd rather not sleep near the horse tonight." Fletcher hesitated only a moment before moving beside her. He stayed above the blanket, hands folded behind his head, gaze on the stars emerging overhead. Naomi lay on her side, Oliver tucked against her stomach. The warmth of Fletcher's presence nearby wasn't loud or invasive. It felt like shelter. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in weeks, she did not dream of being left behind. They rose before the sun, the land still hushed in the blue hush between night and morning. Naomi folded the blanket carefully, tucking it around Oliver where he sat drowsy-eyed against her hip. Fletcher was already at the edge of the spring, rolling his sleeves down with damp hands and watching the ridgeline. "Smoke to the west," he said without turning. "Could be a homestead or a trapper's fire, not thick enough for trouble yet." Naomi followed his gaze. A faint thread of gray climbed into the sky, pulling her thoughts forward. "We'll need more cornmeal soon. I've got dried beans and some lard left. If the cabin ahead's friendly, we can trade for eggs or bread." She adjusted Oliver's sling. "What do you give in trade?" Fletcher opened one of the saddle bags and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in deer hide. Inside were hand-carved fishing lures, polished smooth with wire hooks. "I make these. Folks near rivers usually take to them." Naomi traced one with her finger. "You carve?" "When I don't sleep." They broke camp without speaking further, the rhythm between them quiet and sure. By late morning, the land had thickened with trees, dry ponderosa and twisted lodgepole, and the trail narrowed to a wagon-width path etched between stone and root. A kestrel circled overhead, its cry sharp against the stillness. Oliver stirred and whimpered softly. Naomi rocked him where she rode behind Fletcher, her voice low and steady. "His fever's cooled some," she said after a while. Fletcher nodded. "Good sign. There's a creek 2 miles ahead. We'll rest there." The cabin came into view just beyond the creek bend, half sunk into the earth with a sod roof and a smoke trail curling from its crooked chimney. A woman stood in the doorway, a shotgun resting against her hip and a kerchief tied tight around her head. She squinted as they approached, her stance wary but not hostile. "Name's Fletcher Ford," he said, reining in. "We're heading west, looking to trade." The woman glanced at Naomi, then at the bundle in her arms. "You got anything useful?" Fletcher held out the carved lures. "I fish what I use. These bring in trout thick even in cold months." She stepped forward, inspected one, then nodded. "You'll get eggs and a loaf, maybe a jar of preserves if you chop some wood." Fletcher dismounted. "Fair enough." Naomi stayed in the saddle, watching the woman disappear into the cabin. "You always get what you need with a knife and patience. I don't carry more than I can make again." He took off his coat, rolled his sleeves, and moved toward the stump beside the woodshed. Naomi stepped down and sat near the fence with Oliver, who was fidgeting now, his cheeks less red, his fingers tugging at her braid. She let him, heart easing. The sound of Fletcher's axe was steady, not hurried. He worked with precision, splitting each log clean and stacking it without fuss. The cabin woman returned with a basket and set it beside Naomi. "Boy looks better than he did on the horse. He's strong. Got your mother's eyes, I'd guess." Naomi glanced up. My husband had gray eyes. The woman gave a short nod and went back inside. Once the basket was secured and Oliver fed, they resumed the trail. Fletcher packed the food carefully, making sure nothing shifted in the saddlebag. Naomi didn't speak until they were well into the wooded pass. "You were quiet back there. Didn't figure she'd want talk. You read people well." "I listen better than I talk." Naomi shifted in the saddle, her back aching. "You always carry others without asking why." Fletcher adjusted the reins. "Not always. Just when it feels like the right road." She studied the slope ahead, where sunlight filtered through tall pine and the path curved out of view. "What made this one feel right?" He didn't answer right away. "Then, you looked like someone who hadn't been given a reason to keep going. And I've seen what happens when that goes on too long." Naomi looked down at Oliver's sleeping face. "I didn't think I'd make it past the first night." "You did." "I did." The trail narrowed again, this time climbing. Fletcher leaned forward in the saddle, weight shifting to help the horse manage the incline. Naomi held tight, her arm curled protectively around Oliver. They stopped in a clearing high above the valley floor, with wild columbine growing in clusters and a hawthorn tree bent low near a rock face. The view stretched for miles: rolling hills, scattered pines, the line of a river carving silver through the distance. Fletcher stepped down and tied off the reins. He reached for his canteen, handed it to Naomi. "We'll camp here. Next stretch is steep, better done rested." She drank, then passed it back. "How far to Fort Benton now?" 3 days, maybe 4. She sat on a flat rock, Oliver curled in her lap. "I'm not sure what I'll find there." "You don't have to know yet." Fletcher crouched nearby, pulling a strip of jerky from his pouch. "You've come this far, that counts." Naomi looked at him. Something in the way he sat quiet, steady, not asking anything made the silence feel safe. "You ever think about staying in one place again?" He looked down, thumb brushing the edge of the jerky. "Sometimes, but I never had a reason that lasted." She didn't speak for a while. "Then maybe you do now." Fletcher looked up, eyes catching hers. The breeze moved between them, carrying the scent of moss and pine. "Maybe I do." She didn't smile, but her hand reached down and brushed his lightly. And for the first time in the long stretch of days since she was left behind, Naomi didn't feel like she was following anything anymore. She felt like she was walking toward something. The air grew thinner the higher they climbed, but the days turned cooler, and Naomi welcomed it. The slope behind them had fallen away into a winding stretch of shadowed valleys, the trail narrowing to a single worn line that clung to the folds of the land. Oaks gave way to spruce, and the ground underfoot softened with needles and damp moss. Fletcher led the horse on foot now, reins looped loosely in one hand as his boots pressed sure into the earth. Naomi rode quietly, Oliver asleep against her chest, his breath warm through the fabric of her blouse. They hadn't spoken since dawn, but it hadn't felt like silence. More like a pause between pages, the kind that didn't need filling. When they reached a rise where the forest opened to a granite outcrop, Fletcher came to a stop. He tilted his hat back, gaze on the northern stretch of valley below. A river coiled there, slow and wide, reflecting the sky in broken pieces. "We'll follow that down," he said. "Should bring us close to Judith Crossing by day after next." Naomi dismounted slowly, stretching out her legs. "Will your friend know you're coming?" "He doesn't expect visitors." "But he doesn't turn them away." She walked to the edge of the rock, blinking against the wind that swept up the slope. "I don't know what I'll say if the cousin's gone. You don't have to say anything you're not ready to." Fletcher stepped beside her, his voice low enough not to wake the child. "But if you don't find what you're looking for, there's still other places, other ways to begin." Naomi watched a hawk drift above the valley, its wings steady and wide. "I haven't let myself think about what comes after." "Not really. Maybe you ought to." She turned toward him, the corners of her eyes drawn with something older than exhaustion. "And what do you think I ought to think of?" Fletcher didn't glance away. "Of what you want, not what you're running from. Start there." Naomi breathed in slowly. The wind caught a wisp of hair at her temple, lifting it gently. I've spent too long not wanting anything. It felt safer. Safe's not the same as living. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Some part of her had been shifting for days now, slow and quiet, the way frost leaves a windowpane with the rising sun. They made camp beneath a stand of fir trees, the ground wrapped in a bed of old needles, soft enough to lay Oliver down without fuss. Fletcher built the fire low, shielding it with stones so the light wouldn't carry. Naomi sat close, not for warmth but for steadiness. "Did you always ride alone?" she asked, her voice quiet beneath the crackle. "There were others once, men I rode with after the war. We drifted jobs, cattle runs, scout work, odds and ends. One stayed in Cheyenne, married a saloon girl. Another didn't make it past Dodge. And the rest went east," he shrugged, "or south, never saw them again." She traced a pattern in the dirt with a stick. "You ever think about going east?" "I did once. After the fire. Thought maybe I'd find work in a rail town, but every time I tried, my feet pointed west." Naomi looked across the fire at him, her brow furrowing. "What stopped you?" He considered that a moment. "Wasn't done looking for something worth staying for." The fire popped softly between them. Naomi leaned back on her hands, the sky above thick with stars now, the kind that came only after the world had turned quiet. "I used to think I had a life all planned out," she said. "Not a big one. Just steady, a kitchen with morning bread, a garden, a child who grew up knowing nothing of fear. You still can." "I don't know where I'd start." Fletcher tilted his head. "You're already halfway there." She laughed once, startled by the sound. "I wouldn't call this halfway." "I would." "You're alive. You've still got your boy, and you've still got the will to choose." Naomi's eyes flicked to his. "And what would you choose, Fletcher Ford, if today was the first day of something?" He didn't speak right away. Then, setting his hands on his knees, he said, "I'd choose a place with room to work, a roof that don't leak, and someone beside me who knows the weight of quiet." Naomi's breath caught, but she didn't look away. "That sounds more like a dream than a plan. Dreams turn into plans when you've got someone to build with." The firelight flickered between them. Fletcher reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of oilcloth. He unwrapped it slowly and handed her a small carved figure, a bird, its wings outstretched, smoothed from pine. "For Oliver," he said. Naomi took it gently, her fingers brushing his. "You made this?" He nodded. She ran her thumb along the wing. "It's beautiful. I used to carve them for my brother's little girl. She'd hide them in her socks and forget where she left them." Naomi looked down at the bird resting in her palm. "He'll keep this close, I think." Fletcher leaned back, stretching out beside the fire. "Good. Let him know someone made it just for him." She tucked the figure into her satchel, then lay down beside Oliver, her back to the fire. After a long while, her voice came soft in the dark. "Would you stay if I asked?" Fletcher didn't answer right away. Then, with no hesitation, "Yes." Naomi closed her eyes. And though the night was still and the woods deep, she did not feel alone. Not anymore. They reached Judith, crossing by late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows over the cottonwoods that lined the water's edge. The trail widened as it sloped toward the riverbank, where a squat trading post sat nestled between two sycamores, its roof patched with tin and moss. A chimney puffed steady smoke into the sky, and a mule stood tethered nearby, flicking its tail lazily. Fletcher lifted Naomi down from the saddle before tending the horse. Oliver stirred in her arms but didn't wake fully. She adjusted the sling, then followed Fletcher toward the post, each step weighted with something she hadn't let herself name. The door creaked open before they reached it. A man with a pale beard and a limp stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on a ragged apron. His face lit when he spotted Fletcher. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you were a ghost," he said, voice cracking with age and whiskey. "I'm still flesh," Fletcher replied, holding out his hand. "You keeping a ledger like always?" The man slapped his palm. "Course I am. Ain't much else to do out here." Fletcher nodded toward Naomi. "She's looking for a cousin, might have passed through." They went inside, the dimness a welcome relief after the bright day. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with jars, tools, coils of rope, and a few rifles resting behind the counter. The trader moved behind a desk and pulled out a thick, weather-worn book. His fingers, stiff with arthritis, turned pages slow. "Name?" he asked. "Levy Garrison," Naomi said. The trader ran a finger down a column. Garrison, here, traded for seed and canvas last spring, left for Fort Benton with a man named Hollies, said he was building out a homestead upriver. Relief came as a small exhale from Naomi's chest. "So he's there." "Far as I know," Fletcher looked at her. "You want to press on?" Naomi glanced down at Oliver, then back toward the open door. "We've come this far." The trader waved a hand toward the shelves. "Take what you need, no charge." "Oh, this one for pulling me out of that ravine 2 winters back." "I didn't do it for credit," Fletcher said. "Good thing I'm offering it anyway." They left with a small parcel of flour, dried apples, and a pair of wool socks Fletcher tucked into Naomi's satchel without comment. The river trail north ran flat and clear, the current beside them slow and glassy. Naomi walked now, kneading the rhythm of her own steps beneath her. Fletcher kept pace, reins loose in his hand, saying nothing unless she spoke first. "You think your friend back their lives like that all the time?" she asked after a mile. "Likes the quiet, says it keeps his bones from aching more than they need to." She gave a soft hum of agreement. "I think I understand that now." By dusk, they found an abandoned trapper's lean-to near the river's bend. The wooden frame still held, and Fletcher patched the windward side with pine boughs while Naomi laid Oliver down on the softest patch of earth she could find. He didn't cry, just curled into the blanket and sighed. "I want to ask you something," she said as Fletcher returned from the trees with firewood. "All right. If I told you I don't want to go to Fort Benton alone, would you come?" Fletcher crouched by the fire ring, arranging the kindling with care. "You don't owe me that, I know, that's why I'm asking." He looked up at her, hands stilled. "Then yes, I'll go." Naomi stepped closer. "And if I said I don't want to stay with my cousin? That I want to build something with someone who knows how to carry things that hurt? Would you stay?" "I'd stay," he said, voice low. "I'd build." She knelt beside him, her hand finding his wrist. The fire caught between them, shadows dancing across his face. Fletcher leaned in slowly, his forehead resting against hers. "I didn't think I'd have this again," he whispered. "You do," she said. "We both do." They stayed like that a while, the crackle of fire the only sound. When they finally lay down, it was not hurried or uncertain. Naomi curled beside him, her head on his shoulder, Oliver safe between them. There was no need for promises. They had already been made in every mile, every quiet act, every small kindness freely given. The next morning, they reached the Garrison homestead by midday. Levy greeted Naomi with surprise, a little older and a lot thinner than she remembered from the letter, but kind enough. He offered her the cabin's spare room and a corner of the garden to tend, and he didn't ask questions Fletcher wasn't ready to answer. They stayed a month. Fletcher helped Levy build a new chicken coop, repaired the roof, and traded fish for honey with a neighbor downriver. Naomi planted beans and squash, hemmed Levy's shirts, and taught Oliver to name birds by their calls. At night, she and Fletcher sat on the porch steps, not speaking much, just watching the stars and listening to the wind move through the cottonwoods. 1 week before the first frost, Levy pulled Naomi aside. "You don't belong here," he said kindly. "You and that boy need your own start. Not someone else's halfway place." Naomi nodded. "We've been thinking the same." Levy handed her a folded paper. "There's a parcel upriver, 4 acres, belonged to a trapper who passed on. No kin. Land agent says it's claimable. House needs work, but it's standing." She took the paper, throat tightening. "Thank you." Fletcher didn't hesitate when she told him. "We'll make it ours." They moved the next week. The cabin had a stone hearth, a loft, and a root cellar that stayed dry even in rain. Fletcher built shelves. Naomi mended the curtains. Oliver learned to toddle across the floor, chasing the light through the windows. The day the first snow fell, Fletcher took Naomi's hand near the fire. "I've never asked you proper," he said. but I'd like to call you mine. Not just by trail or by kindness, but by truth. Naomi kissed his knuckles. You already do. They married that winter, in the clearing behind the cabin, just them and a neighbor woman who brought cornbread and a sprig of pine for her hair. There was no music, no speeches. Just a vow whispered between them, quiet and certain. Years passed. They planted apple trees. Fletcher built a second room. Oliver grew into a boy with strong legs and quiet eyes. He never called Fletcher anything but Pa. And Naomi, once left behind with nothing but dust and grief, stood each morning in the doorway of a house she called home, a man beside her who had never asked her to be anything but herself. The world didn't owe her peace. She'd earned it, and it held.